Jake, if you invited me to your home and let me look around, what prescription medications might I find?
Yeah, that's going to be a no comment. Yeah, but perhaps one day you'll get a chance to see what prescriptions I'm on, Gator.
Okay.
Podcaster Origin Story.
Hello, I'm Gator McKLUSKY. Over the course of the last few years, my guest has become one of the most exciting sports radio hosts to ever cover the New York Jets. From his regular spots on ESPN radio, both locally and national, to his stints on SiriusXM's Mad Dog Sports Radio, along with his daily Jets podcast, The Jake Asman Show is currently one of the most watched Jets podcasts on YouTube. I'm thrilled to have with me here today the great Jake Asman. Hello, Jake. Thank you for joining me.
Anytime you need me, Gator, I am there. I'm thrilled. I'm excited. And man, it just feels weird you being on the other end of this video call. So am I actually talking to the real Gator? You know, that's one of the first thoughts I had when I joined this thing.
You're talking to one of them. Therapy is in my future, in my past, and in my present. But I'm going to try to make this as painful as possible. And the good news is we're not going to talk about the Jets today. We're going to dig into your history. This is sort of an origin story. We'd like to find out something about Jake Asman, maybe that other people don't get to know about when they just watch you on a daily basis on your YouTube channel or listen to you on the radio. So you ready?
Let's do it.
Well, let's start at the beginning. I'd like to know, where is it that you grew up?
So I grew up on Long Island. I went to Syosset High School. Before that, though, I lived in East Meadow for a couple of years, and I bring that up because as a huge Jets fan, as you know, East Meadow, their team name, their high school or athletic sports name, the East Meadow Jets. So the Jets were engraved in me very early on, but then I became a Syosset Brave from grades second all the way through 12th. So that's where I grew up. I'm a Long Island kid, born and raised.
My understanding is that your folks were Jets fans, or your dad?
Yeah, my dad was a huge Jets fan growing up. Him and my grandpa were, original Jet season ticket holders when the Jets still played at Shea Stadium. So being a Jet fan, I didn't have a choice. It was just engraved in me early on. That's probably not the best upbringing, as you could imagine. It would have been a lot easier, I'm sure, to be a Giants fan, and I've seen some Super Bowls in my lifetime, but I wouldn't change a thing because it has obviously led to some amazing things in my life through being a fan of the Jets. So it's all worked out, I'd say, despite the lack of winning for most of my life as a fan.
So what about your family? Do you have siblings?
I have a younger brother. Yeah, his name is Zach. He's also a huge sports fan. He's not as big of a nut job as I am, but he roots for the same teams that I do. So we have that bond of sports for sure.
Said I wasn't going to ask any Jets questions, but when Zach Wilson was brought to the team, did that mean anything special to him?
I think he enjoyed the fact that the Jet quarterback's name was Zach. I think he was annoyed by how no one knew how to spell Zach, and this still bothers me to this day, even though I'm no, Zach Wilson fan, as you know, Gator. It's Z-A-C-H, and my brother spells it the same way. It's not Z-A-C, it's not Z-A-C-K. Zach Wilson and Zach Asman spell it the same way, Z-A-C-H.
And is Jake your born name, or is it Jacob?
Jacob is my government name.
And what about grade school? Did you fit in? Did you have a lot of friends?
I know I had a good time. I had a good group of friends. So I never was someone that struggled to find friends, which was great because I know, and maybe that's not the case with everyone. I was a pretty social person. So I always had a good group of friends. Now my friend groups definitely changed over the years. As I kind of grew up and started to love sports and get into sports, I went from my friends who were into Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh to people who cared more about the Yankee game the night before. So that definitely happened over time. But grade school, I definitely had a great group of friends, and that kind of carried over into middle school and high school as well.
So when was that transition where you started to recognize the sports were important and, maybe after school playing football or something in the yard? And, when did that occur? Do you remember?
I would say probably around fifth grade is when I really started to get into it. I just remember I'd come home from school every day, and I would start getting into watching the Around the Horn, PTI, right into the 6 p.m. Eastern Sports Center. And I always remember it was Jay Harris and Brian Kenny who were the two anchors of that 6 p.m. Sports Center that I'd watch every day. So it would be get home, got a little Round the Horn, then a little PTI, and then it was 6 p.m. Sports Center time. And then if it was baseball season, right into, the Yankee game that night that started at 7 o'clock on the Yes Network. And it was right around that time when I started actually listening to sports talk radio. I'd be in the car with my dad, and the fan would be on. So I'd hear Mike and the Mad Dog, or 10:50 a.m. would be on. And that's when I would hear the Michael K show every day with him and Don LaCreca. And then that, obviously, it would lead right into a Yankee game that Michael K would be calling. So, heard Sports Talk Radio and was like, man, like, how cool would this be to have a job where you get paid to talk about sports? So that's kind of like my earliest memory is kind of listening to it.
So at an early age, you were actually recognizing the voices on the radio and how they did what they did.
Yeah, I don't know if I connected it right away. I just remember, I just have memories listening to the radio. Like, I could vividly remember Michael K getting into, like, a shouting match with someone that was calling into bash A-Rod for his 2006 season and K defending him. Like, I just remember that. It's weird how, like, that stands out. But I just remember, like, a big argument between K and a caller.
All right, bye, Steve. You know what? I can see why Don throws up in his mouth at the mention of you. Sorry.
Back in, like, 06. And I don't know if it hit me then, like, this is what you want to do, what I'm going to end up doing, that type of thing. But it was like this is a pretty cool job. I always loved watching, like, my team's games, but I also would gravitate towards whoever the play-by-play announcers were. And then, from there, I would start going to sleep with, like, the radio on. So I would hear, like, Steve Summers and Tony Page and Mark Malusis do the overnights on the Fan. I was very plugged into sports radio early on. Like, honestly, the biggest thing that ever happened to me in my career would be if you fast forward to end of 8th grade, and one of my teachers told me that Syosset had a radio station that was student run in the basement of the school. So by the time I got to high school, as like a 9th grader, like, my biggest goal was like, how do I get on the radio station? How do I do this, that? So I was fortunate because I got a chance to basically do radio every, single week, doing a 1-hour talk show and call some games for the high school station for football, baseball, basketball, etc. for 4 years going in. So that was definitely huge in my discovering and, like, reiterating, so to speak, my passion for something in sports media. Maybe didn't know what specifically. I wanted to do everything, but those 4 years in high school allowing me to kind of get my feet wet, so to speak, on the radio, that was definitely big.
Did you find yourself spending most of your downtime, whether it be, study hall time or whatever, lunchtime, were you able to be around that environment?
Well, it's kind of funny. The studio was so dumpy at the time. They have since redone it. And we ended up having a couple of days off my either sophomore or junior year due to asbestos. And I'm pretty sure it originated from, like, down in the basement, not far from where the radio station was. So when I wasn't actually, like, on the air or I had a radio class, I wasn't down there a ton just because it was, like, nasty to kind of be down there. But I will say this, when I wasn't on the radio, I was always preparing for that sports talk show. Might have only been an hour, but there was about, 28 hours of prep every week that went into that 1 hour. So, I'd be in class and I'd be, like, looking up notes and stats and different things I wanted to talk about on that 1 hour show. I remember it was 5 p.m. every Friday. It was called the Game Day Blitz. So I still remember it to this day, 15 years later, whatever it's been. That was definitely early on the most influential thing in my career, just having that experience. I was a radio junkie. I was listening to play-by-play and I was looking up different vernacular and terminology you could use when calling a game. So I definitely got that bug early on. And to this day, I still have it, of course.
Did they archive any of those shows that you actually have?
I probably could find some of those old shows. Not as much as I would like, unfortunately. I wish I knew now, hey, you're going to want to save these for something cool like this that I could send to Gator, and who knows what you would do with those. But man, I don't even want to hear some of those takes I had, though, too. But that was right when, the Jets were actually relevant. So there were probably a lot of positive Jet shows, believe it or not, as they were going to 2 straight AFC title games when I was in high school. So who knows where that stuff is? It's easier to find, like, old college radio shows than it is high school stuff.
Did you cover all sports during that time or primarily Jets?
It was a New York sports talk show. And we did Yankees, Mets, Jets, Giants, and we were required to also talk about the Syosset Braves. So it would be like, all right, Syosset's taking on Farmingdale Friday night. This was actually right around the time that MSG varsity was still a thing, and they put a lot of resources into covering Long Island high school sports. So we would always try to get, like, people who were working for MSG varsity on the show as guests as well, which was really cool. But it was a New York talk show, and then you had to talk a little, Syosset Braves at some point during the hour, which, for us was cool because, honestly, a lot of my friends who were athletes, or as I kind of got older and kind of became friends with more of these people, everyone always wanted to talk to me because I was the broadcaster doing their games. So even though I wasn't a great athlete myself, I didn't have the makings of a varsity athlete, to quote Junior Soprano.
All I know is you never had the makings of a varsity athlete.
Oh, son of a bitch!
I had a lot of my friends who were on varsity teams who would want to talk to me as the broadcaster. So that was always kind of neat that even though I was a terrible athlete, not good enough of being a varsity football player or baseball player, or lacrosse was huge in my high school, I was friends with all these guys, and they would include me in the conversation because they knew I knew what I was talking about, which is pretty cool.
In and around that time, you never joined any teams or did anything outside of school even?
No, I played Little League baseball. Baseball was a lot of fun. I played, in a basketball league. I just was never good enough to be varsity in any of these sports. I'm not a good athlete, but I love sports. So I think that's kind of like why I love what I do on the radio so much, or back when I was doing play-by-play or doing some TV stuff or whatever the role was, even writing. I've done some writing in my career. Not very good at it, but I tried to do a little bit of everything. It's because I knew I couldn't play, but I had like the brain to understand what was happening. So this was my way of like expressing myself like, hey, I can't run really fast, but I could talk about people who can and not sound like an idiot when I do it. So that was kind of like a big thing for me.
All right, so take me as you're approaching college. You're still in high school. You're looking at colleges. You're trying to decide where you want to go. Walk me through that process.
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to do something in sports radio, something in sports media. I still, at that point, was not sure. Do I want to be a play-by-play broadcaster? Do I want to be a sports talk radio host? I'll tell you what, Michael Kay probably has had the biggest influence on my career out of like any broadcaster I could pick, because I just love the fact that he had the best of both worlds. He's the play-by-play voice of the Yankees, and he had an afternoon talk show for 4 hours a day. And that to me was like the gold standard, man. Like, wow, your life is all in sports. How cool is that? So I wanted to go to a college that would allow me to basically get on-air reps. I was in a unique spot coming from Syosset High School where, I had 4 years of on-air experience. Sure, it's a high school show that 7 people are hearing, but that's not the point. The equipment worked. I was on the air. I was getting reps. So it was important for me to find a school that would allow me as a freshman to get on the air right away in college. One of the schools I seriously considered was Ithaca College, because I had visited there a couple of years prior when I was, with my summer camp. They do like a college visit tour for the older kids. And out of like the 8 schools over the 2 years I saw, Ithaca was one of my favorites easily. The campus was beautiful. And I just loved the fact that after I visited, they told me, hey, we let freshmen get on the air right away. So I always had that in the back of my head. They offered the most financial aid, which at that point it was like a lock. Like, all right, I'm going there because they're paying me, the most money. So that's how I ended up at Ithaca. And to Ithaca's credit, a week into my freshman year, I had my first update on one of their sports radio stations. I got on the air right away, which was a goal of mine, and it worked. 4 years there, and definitely some of the best 4 years of my life, no doubt.
So when you talk about Michael Kay, did you imitate him at all, or did you, from a very early age, have your own voice as the Jake Asman we know now?
Yeah, so I would say every time I left the conversation with someone, I would say, see ya. I'm just kidding about that one. No, I mean, I'll tell you what, it wasn't Michael that I imitated. I think because I was such a sports radio junkie, if we're talking specifically sports radio, you kind of take bits and pieces from everywhere. Like if you hear me do a show, maybe I pick up on it, but the listener won't. But there's bits and pieces that I think you just naturally like absorb from the broadcasters you listen the most to. I think there's a lot of Joe Beningo in me when I'm ranting about the Jets or one of my teams. I think there's some Evan Roberts in me as well, and that's not just because I have red hair. There's definitely some Michael Kay to how I try to interview, because I think Michael is such a great interviewer, and I grew up always watching his show on Yes called Center Stage, where he would just interview notable people. I think if you really listen, there's bits and pieces from everyone that I tried to take. The one thing that you get teached early on, and people either listen and do it or they don't, you don't want to copy someone. There's only that one person. So I think over the course of being on the air as much as I have, going back to, my freshman year of high school, I think my own unique style has developed just because I was a very charismatic kid. And then how do you take what you do off there on the air where you're comfortable no matter the circumstance? I think that just happens over time with reps. And I'll tell you what, I want to give a lot of love to my closest friend, Dan Budick, because he's probably the funniest human being that I know. He's my closest friend. Just his mannerisms and vernacular, it's rubbed off on me. And so much of what I do, I end up sounding like Dan. So I would say it's not even a broadcaster who I have emulated or sound the most like. It's just being around my friend Dan and some of the things he says, I now say, and we call it in our friend group, Danisms, because it kind of spreads like wildfire. So we all kind of have a little bit of Dan in us. And I take that to the air when I'm like, ooh, ah, and I make those sound effects. That's from him. Or when I go, ah, like that's from him that he's been saying, for 15 years of our friendship, more than that now. So like things like that I don't even realize I do. They originally started with my friendship with Dan, which began back in 2008. So honestly, more than any other broadcaster, shout out to Dan Budick. He'd be probably my biggest influence in like some of the things you hear come out of my mouth when I'm on air.
So back in college, did you commute from home? Did you get to live at home?
So Ithaca is upstate New York. It's or central New York. So it's about an hour south of Syracuse. So I lived up there all 4 years.
Was that the first time you had lived on your own?
No, so I went to sleepaway camp for 10 summers. Yeah, I was a camper, 7 as a camper, 3 as a counselor. So I was used to being on my own because I had done it at that point 8 summers already.
Okay. All right. So back up. You were a camp counselor. All right. Now we got to talk about that because
now you want stories, man, because I've seen some things. Let me tell you, 10 years at Camp Canadensis in the Poconos, some of the best summers of my life. Definitely a lot of late nights drinking when we were counselors and some funny stories that happened there and things people did that cost them their jobs as well. So there's a lot of fun stuff I'll think back on and can't believe it actually happened,
I'm sure we could do a whole podcast on those years. So that being said, as far as your college years go, did you feel as though you made the most of those years? Like, did you basically walk away from that feeling as though it helped get you to that level where once you left college, you were able to, whether it get an internship or get your first job in broadcasting?
It definitely allowed me to get the reps that I needed. I'm not going to sit here and say that all my classes taught me how to be a good broadcaster, because to be honest with you, they didn't. The major was called television radio. I had 0 radio classes in 4 years at Ithaca College. So they have since changed the name of the major because it never made any sense. I learned a lot about TV production, kind of what goes on behind the scenes. There was some things that I think could apply to what I do now. But for the most part, my experience at Ithaca was simply they had 2 college radio stations, they had a TV station, and they had a newspaper that I worked for. I had the opportunity to be the Ithaca play-by-play and color commentator for the football team for 3 years, starting with my sophomore year on TV, then the last 2 over on radio. And radio to me was actually better than TV because you get to do the away games, whereas TV only did the home games. So that was a lot of fun. But I would say, starting the podcast/radio show that I did at Ithaca, the Asman and Budick Show with my aforementioned friend Dan.
From the side of Radio Row here at the Asman and Budick Show table, this is an ICTV special report.
Between that and then the opportunity to just get reps, get on air in a bunch of different roles, that was the most beneficial aspect of IC. And also, while I was there, I was able to land some pretty cool internships each summer that helped me, learn more about the business, make some more contacts. So that to me was way bigger than anything I actually learned in the classroom, because once again, there's no entry-level sports radio class that you're going to take at Ithaca, but it was the opportunity to kind of get on the air and experience those things with my classmates that was the most beneficial.
And what were a few of those internships you had during your college years?
After my sophomore year at Ithaca, I interned in the sports department at Channel 7 WABC. Rob Powers, who has since left and went back to Cleveland, where he's from, was the lead anchor at that time. So getting a chance to kind of see what he does to prepare, getting sent out to the field to cover some events a few times was fun. I got to cover Mariano Rivera's charity golf tournament, and I got to interview Mariano for the station, just ask him some questions. I wasn't on camera, but it was just him talking into the mic, and they were filming it, and someone snapped a great photo of me interviewing Mo. Joe Torre was there, so I spoke with him. David Deal of the Giants was there. So that was a really cool experience that summer. My junior year, Ithaca College has a program where they let you spend a semester either in New York, London, or LA. They have a satellite campus. So built into your curriculum is you take a couple classes a week at their satellite campus. They're easy, not hard, because most of your time is spent where you get an internship in your field that you want. I wasn't going to go to London because I want to be an on-air sports broadcaster in the U.S., and I'm from New York. We chose L.A. Most people at Ithaca choose the L.A. program. So I got to live in Burbank, California with my best friends in college for an entire semester my junior year, and I interned at Fox Sports Radio, one of the 5 national networks in the sports radio space. There's probably more now. I got to be around Colin Cowherd, and I worked on the Jay Moore show, and every day my internship was going in and putting up the podcast for the shows or being in the newsroom editing clips for the update anchors to play on their updates. So I did that for a full semester, and this was the absolute greatest. The intern hours were as followed for me. It was Monday and Tuesday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then it was Thursday, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Done. So I had 2 long days, Monday and Tuesday, nothing on Wednesday, 3 hours on Thursday, and then I had a 3-day weekend as a college kid living in LA for an entire semester. It was the greatest. And we schemed our way out of not having to do a weekend shift because we said, Ithaca College requires us to be available on the weekends for an independent study. So I had a great internship and never had to do a weekend shift where some other interns did. Jake Asman was scheming early on, Gator, and that was a phenomenal time. And then The last internship that I had going into that summer, so this was the summer before my senior year, I was an intern at the Olympics with NBC in Rio. I was one of 4 Ithaca College kids from my class who actually got to go to the Olympics and spend 5 weeks in Rio as what's called a runner. You're basically an errand boy. You help out wherever they need someone. I was Bob Costas for the day when they were figuring out the lighting. They're like, hey, you're short. You're like Bob. Can you stand here and let us work on the lighting on the set? Happy to do it. So I did that. I got Dan Patrick his sushi lunch every day. I programmed like the international phones for all the executives that they needed. Like you name something that needed to be done. Hey, intern, gopher, runner, whatever you want to call me. That was my job for 5 weeks. But it was fun because the reason why I'm able to get Bob Costas on my radio shows because I got a chance to work with him for a while when I was there. Liam McHugh, who is maybe the nicest on-air broadcaster in this business. He was one of the on-air talents I got to work with a lot because I was always on the night shift. These were 12-hour shifts, man. Like once the games actually started, it'd be like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or 11 to 11 or like 12 to 12. Like there were some crazy hours. I was so ready to get back to Ithaca for my senior year by the time it was done. But that was an amazing experience. And then the last internship I had, I worked at ESPN Ithaca, which is the local ESPN affiliate in Ithaca. Is basically an on-air contributor, reporter, whatever they needed, do some updates for them. But that was good because it was a radio gig. I was getting my voice heard on the air, which was huge. So those 4 I had when I was in college, and each one kind of helped me in a different way.
So before we move on, I just want to jump back to Burbank because it sounded like you had a lot of downtime, and I'm curious what you did with it.
Well, there was definitely some pot smoking. I don't think weed was legal yet. And what's funny? I don't even smoke, but but I'm with a bunch of college kids. So all they wanted to do all semester was light it up, man. We had people getting like their med cards. Like it was ridiculous. So it was just a lot of fun, man. It was exactly what you would expect, right? We're at a nice apartment complex with a beautiful pool, beautiful scenic route. We had the Universal Studios seasonal pass, $100, and you can go to Universal whenever you wanted. Obviously some Clippers games and Kings games, few Dodgers games before we got out of there because the semester was ending right around when the baseball season was starting. It was a great experience, man. I mean, once again, 5 months living in LA with your friends from college, it's about as fun as it can get, I'd imagine, outside of, maybe like your senior year, you're about to graduate, everyone's just partying for the last couple of weeks.
So you finished college, you clocked in on all these different internships. Now you're on your own. What happens?
Moved back home with my parents. That was the first thing. I was trying to find a job. It was hard, man. Like even with a lot of this experience that I had, and I thought for a college broadcaster, I was pretty good. It's not like you graduated, ESPN New York or WFN's like, here you go. We want you to host the Drive Time show. It was tough. I tried to get in the door at FAN. Eventually I did as like a part-time producer. Like it was like a battle just to get like a shift. There was just so many part-timers. So it was hard to kind of like get 9 hours a week if I was lucky. Eventually I started to get more and more, but it took a while. So I was sending out my demo tape that I made in college to everyone. And
Jake Asman here with New York Knicks All-Star Carmelo Anthony.
I did get lucky that there was this like internet station at the time. It was called, dumbest name ever, Sports on the Go 1 was the name of the station. And they were like a startup sports radio company. The people that were running it had no idea what they were doing, but they were looking for like on-air people. And I'm like, well, this is what I need. So I wasn't making any money from them, but I also wasn't paying to be on the air. And they had like a small studio space on the east end of Ronkonkoma where I got to do a show every morning, basically, so I would have like fresh tape. So I would do that in the morning. And then if I had an FAN or a CBS Sports Radio shift, I'd go to that in the afternoon / the night, or I'd be just applying for jobs, man. That first year was tough. I wasn't making any money. Thank God I could live at home. Every day I'd go home. I'd send emails out to every PD, and a lot of the feedback would be like, hey, we like you, but we don't have anything. So I was trying to kind of get that first break. About a year after I graduated, I got an email from my former boss. Hey, we're looking for a fill-in host and reporter on our 2 stations that we own in Houston. So the company owned the ESPN Houston affiliate, and they owned SB Nation Radio, which is a national network. So they were basically looking for someone that could contribute to both stations. It was a full-time offer. Wasn't a lot of money at all, but I had friends who were in local TV that were in like Bismarck, North Dakota, or like, Elmira, New York, or Anchorage, Alaska. I had friends who were all over. This was Houston, pretty good place to start. So I moved down there, took the job, and kind of worked my way up to getting actual on-air opportunities with my own show and not just filling in for people like I did for the first 6 to 8 months. That's basically what I did that first year, just trying to find some sort of full-time opportunity. I got lucky that of all the places to move, moving to Houston ended up being a great thing for my career.
And I'm assuming that you had to mainly cover Houston sports. And was that a challenge to have to catch up on all the Houston players and all the Houston teams?
Yeah, my first year, they had me just on the Texans beat mostly. So that was pretty cool because the Texans, they had Deshaun Watson going into his second year. They had Jadeveon Clowney, J.J. Watt, Tyrann Mathieu, DeAndre Hopkins. They had a lot of star power on that team. So it was fun. My first year covering them, the Texans, they started 0-3 in 2018, and then they won 9 in a row. I think they ended up winning 10 or 11 games that year, and it was a really fun season. So it wasn't that hard because I love football. And then I was mainly just hosting shows for SB Nation Radio, which was a national show. So I got to talk about whatever. I feel like if you live in the city where you are, it's not that hard to kind of put on the radio and pick up what the topics of the day are, what fans are saying, kind of get a feel. So plus, the Astros were in the midst of their golden era baseball. The Rockets had Chris Paul and James Harden. They were coming off a trip to the conference finals against Durant and the Warriors. So it was a pretty good time to move down there because all the teams I was covering were very good.
Did you have any kind of mentor in Houston as far as, a voice on the radio that you glued yourself to try to stay up to date with what was going on?
For the most part, the quality of sports radio in Houston is trash. There should not be 3 stations. It's a joke that there is even 3 stations, but there are some really talented hosts that are in Houston. So those would be the shows I would try to hone in on, like who's covering the topic of the day, whose show would pass what I like to call, what my friend Landry Locker has coined, the airplane test. If you get to a new city and you put on sports radio, what are they talking about? And does that show talk about the topics that someone who's new to the city that wants to get a feel for what the topics are, does it pass the airport test? And those would be the shows I'd want to listen to.
What point during your stint in Houston did you wake up and say, I'd really like to talk about the Jets, and formulate a way to do that?
It's a great question. So when I was doing my national show on SB Nation Radio, I had asked my boss, would it be possible to post some segments from this show on YouTube just as a way to kind of grow the brand, grow my show, because we didn't have any social media person or a digital person at this company. And my boss was like, you're willing to do more work and I don't have to pay you any money? Yeah. So I started posting clips from that show. Anytime I would post a segment that happened to involve the Jets, it'd get more views than me talking about whatever happened in the NBA playoffs the previous night or whatnot. So I'm like, well, this is pretty cool. How do I weave in more Jets content on a national show? So I'd be coming up with different angles. I would find anything to talk about the Jets just so I could upload it to YouTube. And then as I see the views continuing to grow, I started seeing that there were other Jet YouTubers that were just doing only Jets. Like they would make a video and it would just be about the Jets for YouTube. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I could do this. Why can't I do a Jet monologue a day type of thing? And that's kind of the origin of the show. I would just tape a segment talking about something Jet related, throw it up. And then eventually it kind of led to doing a show where I'd actually be live instead of it being pre-recorded. And, the comments would be like what a, text line would be on a radio show or what tweets would look like on a radio show. Eventually, when we started taking calls on the StreamYard for the YouTube show, that'd be like, well, you take calls on sports radio. So I treated the YouTube show as if I was doing a radio show that was on camera. And I think that's kind of what allowed me to maybe separate early on. I don't think anyone was really doing the live streaming the way I was when I first got it going. So now you see all the Jet content guys, a lot of them do shows and live streams. That's kind of the way of Jet YouTube right now. But when I first started, it was basically pre-recorded videos uploaded. And I'm like, well, to quote Bill O'Reilly, F it, let's do it live. And that's kind of where we got the theme of what I would do different for the Jake Asman show on YouTube covering the Jets.
And who were those shows that you initially saw and said, I could do this too?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, Matt O'Leary, I feel like always had some great videos that he would post, kind of recapping whatever was going on. Shout out to Ian from Jet Central. I feel like he's been doing it longer than like anyone with his like quick reaction. Tyson Roush from Let's Talk Jets. They were probably the only ones I saw that was like, they were doing like a longer form style of show. Those were the early ones I remember watching because as crazy as it sounds as a diehard Jets fan, I never really viewed YouTube as a place to like seek out Jets stuff. Like I would listen to podcasts and now every podcast is on YouTube in addition to being available in audio form for the most part. So it's kind of funny. I was more of like a traditionalist, like media consumer. And now like I'm the biggest advocate of YouTube for what it's done for my career. Obviously, what deem it as like the future of the business. Like I think if you're in my field and you're not putting content out on YouTube, you're behind, man. Like that's where it's all headed. I got very lucky that When eventually I left ESPN Houston because I got screwed over by terrible management in Houston, I had a full-time job I could immediately sink my teeth into on YouTube. So the YouTube show has been great because it's allowed me, to still make a good living and, not skip a beat after I lost a full-time job last August.
I do want to ask what exactly happened in Houston that you're no longer there.
My two co-hosts both left the station because they thought the station was going to fold within a couple of years. They got just better opportunities. My co-host Brad, he's from the Austin area, and the radio station up there he was working at folded, and he saw it as an opportunity to basically create his own digital radio station covering University of Texas athletics. So can't blame him. He had a bunch of sponsors lined up, and it was an opportunity for him to go back to the city he wanted to live in. A week prior to that, Cody Stutes just decided he didn't really want to do, sports radio, having to cover other sports besides just the Texans, which he was the most passionate about. So Cody left ESPN Houston. That left me as the only one. And station management originally told me, hey, we're going to find you a different co-host. I was doing auditions off air with different people. And then I showed up to work one day on a Monday, and they're like, we're just going to blow the whole show up and you're out of a gig. So I was like, okay, welcome to radio. They say you're not in radio unless you've at least been fired. So it was a crappy situation, but the company is a dumpster fire. They have fired and let go so many of my close friends over the last couple of years. In fact, that SB Nation radio network I mentioned to you, Gator, they now no longer exist. As of last week, the entire network just folded. And my longtime boss, program director, Craig Larson, who, I owe a lot to, he hired me. He's now out of a job too. So, when I talk about the management of the station, I'm not talking about him, but, it starts at the top. It's just a poorly run operation there. And that's why so many people have left and now so many people are getting fired. In fact, they ended up promoting our midday show to replace, the Wheelhouse, the show I co-hosted in afternoons. And they hired 2 new hosts to take over the midday slot. And both those hosts have already been fired due to budget cuts 5 months into the gig. So it was a sinking ship when I got out of there. I was just annoyed because I had committed 5 years of my life to the company and had always been a hard worker and a good soldier. And they just lied to me. They said, you're going to have a new co-host. And then I just showed up to work one day and they canned me. So I have no love for anyone in the management over there because they do people dirty. And it's not just me, it's plenty of others. So, it is what it is. It ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me because I immediately started getting some more shifts on ESPN New York. I was lucky enough to get some shifts now hosting nationally on ESPN Radio as of 2024 and now hosting regularly on Mad Dog Sports Radio on Sirius XM. So it's kind of funny how it worked out, right? I went from a full-time radio host on ESPN Houston and a part-time YouTuber to now full-time YouTuber and a part-time radio host on 3 preeminent stations in ESPN New York, ESPN National, and Sirius XM Mad Dog Radio. So it all worked out for the best, but it was a sad situation because I really enjoyed doing the Wheelhouse with both Cody and Brad, but, they saw the writing on the wall that the company's a dumpster fire, so they left, and I don't blame them. That basically caused me to be, the odd guy out and get canned.
It sounds like it lit a fire under you to have to survive. In a lot of cases, that's a good thing because now you really chased after what it is you wanted to do, and you had nobody to answer to but yourself, right? I mean, you basically carved out your own little niche in exactly what it is you wanted to do. And I've seen you as a fan just be able to blow up since that Houston gig ended. Clearly, you have advanced in the folks that you're interviewing and, the amount of viewers that you have, and your fan base has grown tremendously. Was that a conscious effort, or is that something that really just evolved, the day after you lost that gig?
It was part survival, as you said, like, all right, what am I going to do? Well, I didn't want to move to a different market and do another radio gig. I had some opportunities to maybe, explore doing a local show in various cities. That didn't interest me. I am a New Yorker. I am a New York sports talk show host. It was time to position myself, to make that jump. So what I wanted to do was showcase on my channel that I have a huge following that covers the Jets. Well, Jet fans also care about other New York teams as well. So I kind of started doing more content for the other New York teams, and I wanted to reach out to the powers that be at ESPN New York and put myself in position to get as many shifts as possible now that I was available. Because of SB Nation Radio, I had some great experience being on air, hosting a national show. So then that allowed me to maybe get some opportunities with ESPN on their national network. And the funniest thing is, since ESPN Houston is such a dumpster fire now, they don't have a lot of local programming in non-weekday hours. So when I'm doing weekend shifts on ESPN National, or I'm on doing a night fill-in shift or whatnot, it airs in Houston. So all my Houston listeners are tweeting me and being like, hey, it's great to hear you back on the station. So I just think that's so funny that, they got rid of me, but now they have to carry me because they have no other programming and they're required to air the national stuff. The reason why I put so much time and effort into the Jake Asman show on YouTube is it's opened doors to get other opportunities. And I'm making more money now from my YouTube show than I ever was from the ESPN Houston show. So it's been completely worthwhile from that standpoint. It's untapped earning potential. And also, I love doing it, man. I have a job every day where I get to talk about the team I care about the most and interact with some of the greatest fans in all of sports. I mean, I don't need to tell you this, Gator. You've impersonated all of them. We have some of the greatest listeners ever, man. So I love just doing the show. It's fun. And it's about topics I want to talk about. I get to choose when I go live. I get to choose who I want to have on. I get to work with you on creative ideas for intros and different bits and things that we do. So it's been fun, man. But I'm still a radio guy at heart, and I want to have a full-time show on a New York radio station once again, or a national show on Mad Dog or ESPN National. But I always want to have this outlet on YouTube to be able to do both. For me, the reason why I put so much time and energy into it, it's literally my full-time job right now, you know? So I'll take the radio shifts when I can get them. It's not like I have a set time on any of these stations. I'm grateful when they give me a shift, and I'll kill it, do the best I can when I have those opportunities. But my day-to-day is, what can I do to make the YouTube show better? Which is why it was important for me to be at the Super Bowl this year for the first time in a couple of years and do the show from there. It was important for me to be at the Combine. And because of my relationships and my career, I could get credentials to these things and go. And that gives me, I think, a leg up over, some of the other content you might see on the internet because, yeah, I'm a fan, but I'm also a fan who has a lot of context and has a background in sports radio that's probably a lot different than other people that do what I do for a living.
Yeah, and it seems as though you've been able to get a lot more guests than you've ever gotten. I mean, you interviewed Joe Namath a few times, Darrell Rivas, Joe Klecko, and most recently Rich Eisen. So that must have been a great notch on your belt as well. Who else would you like to interview that's sort of on your bucket list? I know you've been asked that 100 times.
Rich was definitely up there. He was certainly like on the short list of like great guests I'd love to have on the YouTube channel. Number one, though, is Rex Ryan. I don't want to just have Rex on for 15 minutes. I was lucky enough to fill in for Rick DiPietro and Dave Rothenberg on ESPN New York's morning show Christmas week, and Rex does a weekly with them every Monday. So we had Rex on for a 15-minute spot, but we had to talk about the games the previous day. We had to talk about the Giants. We had to talk about the current Jets. I want to do an hour-long interview with Rex where we talk about the good and the bad, and we could talk about maybe the present-day Jets too, but I want to get into his run with the team because the one thing I think I do well is a long-form interview, and I want to get that opportunity to do something like that with Rex. So he's my number one guest if I could pull that off.
Yeah, and I think your fans will be happy to hear, and it sounds to me like if you were to get a job in radio full-time, let's say ESPN or Sirius Radio or wherever it may be, this Jets show is not going away. It seems like you're very committed to, it may not be 2 shows a day like you're doing now, but it sounds like it's something that you'll probably always hold on to and never give up.
Yeah, I hope to continue it because I really think it's the future of my business. Obviously, financially, it's been huge for me. There's so many people in my business, Gator, that get fired in radio and they're screwed. I'm a single guy. I don't have kids, so it's not like if I had to get up and uproot my family, that'd be an issue. I could have moved anywhere and got another gig. A lot of people get fired in radio, and it's hard to get another job. I think one of the things that I've been able to do is I know how to produce, I know how to edit. I know how to be on the air. I know how to do everything that the behind-the-scenes people do, and I'm good on air, so that makes me versatile. I also had been planning for a worst-case scenario with ESPN Houston by having this YouTube channel to sink my teeth into. I definitely want to continue to build it up, but you're right. If I, let's say, had a full-time radio gig, we probably would not be doing 2 90-minute shows Monday through Friday. It probably would maybe be like 1 show a day Monday through Friday, and maybe rare occasions, breaking news, squeeze in some more, that type of thing. Honestly, it will go back to what it was when I was doing the Jet show and I was still on ESPN Houston every day. I would do 1 show, mostly in the morning because I was on 3 to 7 Houston time in the afternoon. So I'd get up between 9 or 10, crank out a Jet show, and then my attention would go to the Houston show. So I want to eventually get back to that. Until then, the YouTube show is how I pay my bills, how it's afforded me the opportunity to move to a New York City apartment in less than a month. So it's still very important for me and for my listeners who put so much time into consuming the show every day to put out a good product. And we're going to make sure we continue to do that.
Are you excited to come back to New York?
I am very excited. It's also bittersweet. Great people down here, great friendships. The weather I'm going to miss. I'm glad I'm moving in April, so it won't be that long until it's nice again in New York. But it's definitely exciting. I think for what I want to do, being more in the mix in the New York area is beneficial for my career. I think being closer to where New York teams play and being able to cover different events and kind of being more in the mix, more of a visible in-person presence should be helpful at some of my radio gigs as well. I just think it's time, man. The only thing that brought me to Houston in the first place was the job. It's not like I have a family down here that, I can't move now. It's easy for me to make this jump. I've always had the dream of living in New York City, at least experiencing it. Friends and family still obviously all live in New York. So it's time to make that move. I'm excited for it, but I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't miss Houston because there's a lot of great aspects of the city that have been incredible.
So what do you do to unwind? What makes you happy outside of your love for sports?
I'm a foodie, I guess. I like eating at different restaurants, and I like spending time with my friends, going out to a bar, having a drink. I'm a social person by nature, so when I'm not working, I like to kind of just hang out with people I enjoy being around. And honestly, I think what's so cool about sports, there's always a game on that you could watch and use as a reason to kind of get together with a bunch of people, right? So I like going out and hanging out with people and laughing with friends. That's some of the most fun I think you could have.
So if you had a choice, that would be over being alone and home and and watching the game by yourself.
Well, I'm unique. If it's my team in, I'd rather either watch with other diehard fans or be absolutely alone. The worst thing for me is to watch a big game with one of my teams with people who aren't at that same level. And if it's the Jets, there's no one at that same level, so I prefer to watch games alone. If I'm, just like watching a game that I care about, I want other sports fans with me and not people who are going to be like, why is there no yellow line on the field? I don't get it. If you're watching it in person, depending on like how big the game is to me personally will impact who I watch it with, or if I'm at the game, who I'll be at the game with, that type of thing.
And you watch all four majors? You have teams in all four sports?
Yeah, Knicks in basketball, Jets obviously in football, Yankees in baseball, Islanders in hockey.
And what about outside of the four majors? Do you pay attention to tennis or boxing or anything else?
If it's a big boxing fight, I might be interested. I like UFC better than boxing if I can only choose one to watch. But if it's not like a big UFC pay-per-view card, I would consider myself a casual, fan of UFC at best. Any like big sporting event, like I'm in on, man. If people are competing at the highest of high level and there's intrigue, like I'll flip it on. I'll give it a shot. Yeah, that's kind of how I've always been.
And is it more so when you're doing like a national gig, you really have to catch up on a lot of different things?
If I'm hosting nationally, you want to pay attention to what you might end up having to talk about. But for the most part, nationally, you're only talking about a couple of sports. You're not going to do too much tennis talk on a national show. It's going to be football. It's going to be basketball, maybe some baseball, maybe college football. It all kind of depends on what's going on in the news cycle.
All right, let's go with some basics now. Not that, this is anything you haven't answered before, but a lot of people are curious. So what's your favorite television show, your go-to, like, iconic television show?
Favorite show of all time is Entourage.
Really? Okay. And you have a friendship with one of the cast members.
Jerry, great to catch up. Appreciate you coming on.
Jake, thank you for having me. You got me nervous.
Yeah, which is pretty cool, right? If you would have told, 12-year-old Jake Asman that, Turtle from Entourage and him would be texting about, the Knicks, it'd be pretty surreal, right? But yeah, Jerry Ferrara has been a frequent guest on some radio shows I've hosted. Super nice guy. And it's funny, I've actually gotten a chance to meet most of the cast at this point. I interviewed Jeremy Piven a few years ago and had him on my Houston radio show when he performed at the Houston Improv. He invited me to a show and got to talk to him after he went up on the stage, and he was really cool. And Kevin Connolly, I've met twice. I met him at an Islander game when I was like a freshman in high school, and I looked like 9 years old in the photo. I had such a baby face. And then years later, he co-owns a sports bar out in L.A., and I was out in L.A. for a work trip a few years back and went to that sports bar, and he happened to be there. So I got a chance to talk with him again that day and take, a follow-up photo, 15 years later. I've met, 3 of the 5 main characters from the cast, which is pretty cool.
And what about favorite film? I mean, it might be hard to narrow it down to one, but if you had to put one at the top of your all-time list, most rewatchable movie that you love.
Just picking like one movie's tough, but it's like, all right, if you can only watch one movie, the original Spider-Man, the one with Tobey Maguire from 2002. I also would love to say just Dark Knight. And then if I'm going comedy, man, like it's tough for me to not say like Step Brothers or Wedding Crashers or Superbad. It's so tough for me to narrow it down to just one, but I'll do it because you're asking me the hard questions here. I will say Dark Knight.
Why so serious?
Give me a little Heath Ledger, Christian Bale, and let's go.
So now I'm going to give you that question again, but I will narrow it down. Your all-time favorite sports film.
I got it. All-time favorite sports film, Miracle.
Kurt Russell. Would you say you had to be a huge hockey fan for that, or you just find that to be the one that resonated with you the most?
If you're just a fan of sports or good storytelling, that's an all-time movie. Anyone will like Miracle, even if you've never even seen a hockey game in your life. It's that good. I will say one of the cooler moments in my life was getting the chance to go on the Lake Placid ice and actually skate on the rink where the Miracle on Ice occurred. So that was pretty sweet. My favorite football movie, there's been a lot of great football movies, but I would say Remember the Titans is my favorite football movie.
Longest Yard for me. As you know, I'm the Burt Reynolds guy.
Yep.
Your show has developed into a variety show of some sort of comedy and drama and intrigue.
He stinks!
And sometimes your fans tune in and you're happy or you're sad or you're yelling or you're screaming or you're passionate at every given turn here and there. And then you start taking phone calls.
Me, man. Come on.
And some of them go this way and that way. And you could argue that they are one of the most important aspects of your YouTube channel. And some of them have asked you some questions, or they've asked me to ask you some questions. And I'm going to feed you a few. As I read these names off, before I read their question, you can make a comment before you answer the question and let me know a little bit about how you feel about these certain individuals. First one we're going to start out with is a fellow by the name of Mr. Bonesy. He's a regular caller, and he's probably one of your favorites. What can you tell me about Mr. Bonesy?
A genuinely great human being. Just someone that you want to have a beer with.
Jake, let's go, baby. Here we go. Let's go. Here we go.
Someone that just brings life to every room they walk into. Getting the chance to watch a full-on Jets game with Mr. Bonesy was quite the experience. He's as diehard as any of us. And he saw me at my highest, kind of walking in. The vibes were high, great weekend. And then he saw me at my lowest on that depressing walk that took 1,000,000 hours to get to a taxi cab to get back to Circa after that Jet Raider game ended. So someone like him is why you love doing this show, because you get a chance to connect with so many great people, and he's certainly at the top of that list.
Nice. And he's a good shoe salesman, too.
It's probably Al Bundy, Michael Jordan, and Mr. Bonesy, top 3 shoe salesmen of all time.
So he has a question. He'd like to know, what sport would you fill in if they absolutely needed somebody to fill in some sort of sport? Which one of those would you excel in the most?
Well, none. Let's be very clear. What sport would I have a chance to maybe kind of be buried and not impact the team? I'd say baseball. Okay. If you stuck me on a baseball field at like second base, I wouldn't be good, but there's a chance the ball wouldn't be hit to me. Right? Or you put me in like right field. I wouldn't be good, but you could probably like disguise me. If you put me in a baseball lineup, I wouldn't get any hits, but maybe there's a chance I could get hit by a pitch. I don't know. I wouldn't hit into any double plays because I wouldn't be able to make contact with the ball. I would say baseball because I think I would least impact the team's performance because that's just the nature of the sport. If you think about it, if I'm batting, I get what, maybe 3 or 4 plate appearances in a game? Like a good baseball player could go 0 for 4. So Jake Asman, you go 0 for 4. You're putting 2 pitchers in your lineup that can't hit.
He also wants to know if you play any video games currently or back in the day. Are you any sort of a gamer?
He used to be a pretty big gamer during my like high school years. We used to always play Call of Duty and Halo, and we'd play Madden, play the NHL. You know, growing up, I used to love playing MLB The Show on the PSP. That used to be my thing at summer camp. You know, I'd always like do a create a pro and go through the minor leagues and get called up to the show. Eventually get to a point where like your guy's like 99 and everything, and you're just like Barry Bonds on steroids in MLB The Show. So that was like my favorite game on the PlayStation. And then I would religiously play Mario Kart with my brother. Well, I was the best Mario Kart player.
We're going to get some questions from Eileen, who's also known as Leanie and lives in North Carolina, as you know. When Jake was little, what did he want to be when he grew up? That sounds like a Leanie question.
Leanie, you're one of the all-time greats. We love you, Leanie. Probably wanted to be the center fielder for the New York Yankees. But then I quickly realized, well, you actually have to be good to get that job.
If you had your choice between just radio or being on radio/TV, which would you choose? Would television be something that you would prefer to be, like the Rich Eisen sitting behind the desk, or would it be just something on radio?
So I would rather be radio if it's like doing a show versus like being an anchor, like to use your example, what Rich does, right? Like Rich, I think, is someone who has the best of both worlds. He has his daily show every day. It's almost like a radio show, but it's also on TV. It's like on a streaming service. And then he obviously is the anchor on NFL Network. And I think that's great. if I can only choose between like traditional like TV anchor versus like on-air talk show host, to me, give me the radio talk show host every time. Because I never wanted to read a teleprompter. I always wanted to give opinions. And when you're doing the local news or you're anchoring a show, you're talking in like sound bites and you're not having that long form like canvas that you get to paint when you're hosting a show. And that's why I loved radio so much, man. Like it's so personality driven and you kind of have way longer of a runway to express yourself and be funny and have bits and callers and everything that goes into putting together a radio show.
And what about a guy like Pat McAfee? Do you look at something that he does as the same vein as what Rich Eisen is doing, or is that something that's completely new and different?
Rich's show and Pat's show is similar from the standpoint that it's kind of like a radio show, but it's on camera. That's kind of what my YouTube show is in a sense. It's a lot smaller. You know, we don't have co-host or a big TV set, but like what I do on YouTube is basically take elements of what you hear on the radio and apply it on video. That's kind of where the business is going. So I want to continue to be a talk show host on the radio when I'm on Sirius or ESPN, and then take elements from that and apply it to what I do on YouTube. And I think Pat's the gold standard for that because his show is so successful on YouTube that radio stations were buying his rights to air it on terrestrial radio. He was on CBS Sports Radio for a little bit. They used to air 2 hours of a show on Mad Dog Sports Radio. Now he's on TV every day. ESPN bought him out. So like Pat to me is kind of like the gold standard of taking elements of what works for radio and doing it digitally, which eventually gets you back to linear TV. If you listen to my show, you're going to get sports takes about the team you care about, but we don't take ourselves too seriously, which I think is important because, you know, anyone could talk about a team. You know, it's the personalities that keep people coming back. Do you like the personality you're investing your time in? If you're going to invest time into my show, it needs to be more than just, 8 to 10 minutes of me talking about should the Jets sign Mike Evans. There has to be more things that I could do that will bring you back and make you kind of part of the community that we built up. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? We have a show, but we have a community within that show. I think it's the coolest thing ever to see events where listeners are hanging out with one another and they met through the show. That is such a rewarding feeling to feel like you are part of a community built up where friendships are being born through the common bond of you tune in to watch Jake Asman talk about, our crappy football team. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and if I could say so as a fan, I mean, I know that one of the things about you that draws a lot of folks to you is you're not afraid to lose a listener. And I think that's important because you sort of wear your personality on your sleeve and you're honest. And there are times where, you have to say what's on your mind and it may drive a subscriber or two away. But I think ultimately that's why a lot of your followers, fans watch you because they see that you're not full of shit. If something irks you, you'll let the person know. And if they never watch you again, you're okay with that. And I think that's important.
There's reports from people I respect that the Jets are going to have to attach a goddamn draft pick to get him off their team. I'm so sick of you truthers. Leave. He can't play.
Yeah, I think just being authentic is the biggest thing with that, right? Like, I might not always be accurate or right with my opinion that I give. It might not age the best, but I can promise you if I'm saying something, it's because I believe it, not because I'm trying to do a clickbait or get a reaction or say something just to like drive the audience nuts. So they say, you're nuts, and they comment and I get more engagement. That's never been me. It's not how I've done YouTube. It's not how I've done the radio. Maybe I'd be further along if I did the hot take BS that you see. But I don't have it in me to lie. It's hard for me to not be me, if that makes sense. Like, any opinion I have on air is how I truly feel. And no one bats 1,000 when you give sports opinions for a living. But I can promise you they're at least well-thought-out opinions. Like, I don't just say things. Or if I'm saying I heard something, I'm not just making it up. Like, I care about my credibility. I care about being authentic. If I'm going to ruffle some feathers along the way, that's okay. Because I think for the most part, the audience knows, like, Jake's a good guy. He cares about his audience. And he's truly saying what he feels. And I think Jet fans relate to that. We're all frustrated, but I'm always going to try and, call it how I see it and not just, pile on for the sake of piling on if that's the common prevailing narrative, whatever that might be about.
So Leany's last quick question here is if you did get that radio show, that full-time radio gig, what would be the perfect time slot for you?
The most money you could make in radio is either mornings or afternoons. So I'd be a fool to give my potential bosses leverage if I said my dream job is overnights. The reality is, I want a full-time on-air job. I want a set show. I'd be grateful for any opportunity. I do have a lot of on-air experience. I've hosted middays. I've done afternoons for a national network on SB Nation Radio. I did afternoons for 2.5 years on an ESPN affiliated station in the fourth biggest city in the country. So I'm open to whatever gets me a full-time opportunity. But the dream scenario would be, I think afternoons, because I'm not a morning person. I learned that, doing a week of morning drive fill. It's not easy getting up and performing. So I have such great respect for those who do it that early. But I think ideally it's the afternoons. But, they say, Jake, well, too bad. We want you to do morning drive. I'd be like, okay, where do I sign? So whatever gets me on the air is the answer.
So next comes from Snowball, who's another one of your regulars, says, what memories do you have of being Mr. Favilla's broadcasting class in high school? Assuming you know what that means.
Yeah, so shout out to Mr. Favilla. He is was the station faculty manager, so to speak, for the Syosset High School radio station, and he knows our guy Snowball very well. So Mr. Favilla was the one who interviewed me, was part of the interview process for me to be the sports director of the radio station my senior year of high school. So just getting a chance to essentially report to him as sports director and kind of go through that interview process with him and him telling me, hey, you got the job. That's probably my favorite memory because at the time, that was like my biggest accomplishment as a broadcaster, right? You're the sports director of the Syosset High School station, WKWZ, 88.5 FM, and I got to make the schedule, and I got to pick who I got to do the games with, and what time slot I wanted my show on the station to be every week. So that was such a rewarding experience. It kind of felt like it was 3 years of hard work leading up to that moment with Mr. Favilla. So I'd have to say that would be my number one moment.
Snowball also points out that apparently Natalie Portman went to your high school. Do you have any memories of that?
Yeah, she's about a decade older than I am, I think. Graduated, obviously, well before me. But there's a yearbook photo from her senior year at Syosset, and it didn't say Portman next to her name. And it was the first I learned that Portman's a stage name. Her actual last name is like Hirschlag, I think. I think it's Natalie Hirschlag. So that's the only memory I have of Natalie Portman, that, yes, she's from my hometown. She went to my high school.
Well, Hirschlag definitely doesn't have the same ring as Portman.
I should have probably had a stage name too, but at this point, Asman is so ingrained into what people know me as, it's too little too late. But I will say, if I didn't have a high school station, there is a chance I would have had, an on-air name like many people do. But at this point, I think Asman is great because it kind of stands out. It's like, who's this guy? Asman? I think when people don't know, it helps. So it ended up being a helpful thing. But I wonder if I could do it all over again if I would have had like Jake Portman as my like on-air name or something like that. Or my middle name is Harris. I could have been like Jake Harris on the radio or something.
All right, next up we have Craig from Australia. And he asks, how far do you think you can go in this business? And how high are you aiming?
To the moon, Craig. What's above the moon? How high can I go in this business? To be honest, I have not thought about like, I need to get here. For me, it's, I want to be based in New York. I'm about to do that. I want to be able to make a living talking about sports while being able to afford to live in New York. I now can cross that off. And I want to eventually get to a point where I'm full-time again doing a daily show on the radio and kind of figure it out. Like I could say, I want to be afternoons on ESPN New York. I don't know with the way the business is going, if that's always going to be like the best position to be in, right? Like radio is very different now than it was a couple of years ago. Who's to say there's not more money being a YouTuber, branching out and doing more than just the Jets down the line than it would be to do like radio stuff. So I would say I'm kind of focused in the now and just kind of growing my brand and getting on the radio as much as I can and kind of figuring it out from there. I'd like to eventually have like a presence on TV, whether that be on ESPN or Fox or even locally on SNY doing some stuff. I don't really have like a set goal. Like I need to make it here and then I feel like I've made it. To me, it's put myself in a spot where every year I'm still growing and then kind of figure it out from there.
Do you see a ceiling with your Jets YouTube channel? Do you figure there's like a point at which you've hit the maximum subscriber number? Some of your fans aren't Jet fans. I know you have a Chiefs fan and you have a Green Bay Packers fan that call in regularly. But where do you see your YouTube Jets channel? You think there's a ceiling on that?
I guess there has to be at some point, but I don't think we've come close to reaching it because how many people do we see every day that join, say, I'm a first-time caller, or this is my first super chat, or I'm watching for the first time? I mean, I keep gaining subscribers, so we obviously haven't hit the ceiling mark yet. I think it's going to be telling to see if the Jets are good, right? They're actually a good team next year, what that could do for the channel. Because all offseason, the viewership was insane last year with the Rodgers pursuit. And now it's kind of dipped because there's just less going on. But if they're actually good in the regular season, what will that do? How many subscribers can I gain month over month. Could we get to 50,000 at this time next year? I think with a good year, it's possible. So I don't think we've hit the ceiling for the Jet content. And I also think maybe the future is for me to just do more and more just New York sports stuff. But we haven't gotten there yet because I'm so focused on just building out the Jet audience and then making sure I still have enough bandwidth to get ready for the radio stuff I'm doing while figuring out how do I get more people on Patreon and growing that community? And how do I bring in more sponsors that could help support the massive audience I've accumulated so I could monetize the channel more than reinvest back into doing more cool things like covering a combine or going to a Super Bowl. So the channel still has so much untapped potential to get into with. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it seems Jet fans are hungry for content 12 months out of the year. There's no downtime.
Definitely.
Johnny asks, how is your relationship with your dad and how that led to your Jets fandom? I know you have a close relationship with your dad, but can you tell us anything about how you guys are together?
My dad is, like, he means everything to me. He's so supportive, always has been. He's essentially, I don't have an agent, but he's essentially my agent. Any business decision I'm weighing or anything that has to do with my career, he's in my corner. I'm calling him, and he might drive me crazy sometimes with his inability to figure out, technology or just different things that dads do that annoy you. But he's the best. I love him to death. And he's the reason I'm a Jet fan, because I'd watch the games with him as a kid. I could always remember, like, very young, he'd be in our living room and he'd be screaming about something that happened in the game. And it would become like a thing, like, oh, like, Dad's watching the game again. My earliest memories watching the Jets are like, watching like Chad Pennington in like 2003 or 2002, like be the quarterback and like not knowing anything. Or the first jersey I ever owned was like a Jonathan Bilma jersey that was bought by him. The Jets was always kind of like passed down through him because he would go to games with my grandpa, and my grandpa passed away when I was very young. He passed away in 1998. I was only a couple of years old at that point. I think because he had that connection with his dad, it was important for him to have that connection, I think, with his two sons. So I think that's kind of like a big reason why, the Jets, I think, are such a big part of my life. And thank God he doesn't care about baseball, because I'd be a Met fan, and I would really have no happiness with any of my teams had he made me a Met Jet fan with, the Islanders and the Knicks as the other two teams. Good God.
I can't imagine the pride that your father must have felt when he watched you interviewing the great Joe Namath. That must have been a moment that your dad just sat there and said, look at my son.
It was awesome. I know it meant a lot to him. And what's great too? It's about 10 years in the making from the last time that my dad and I were in the same room as Joe Namath. My senior year of high school, somehow my dad got invited to a Joe Namath March of Dimes charity event that was held at the Marriott Hotel across the street from the Nassau Coliseum. Joe Namath was like one of the guests of honors that night, raising money. And we got to take a picture with him and talk with Joe before he met the general public, because my dad knew someone like very high up on the charity that invited him, because he knew obviously Namath was his biggest fan. He's a big Jet fan. So there's a photo of me, my dad, and Joe Namath from like 2012 that I absolutely love. My dad hates when I show it on the show. I've shown it a couple times because my dad is like way skinnier now than he was when those photos were taken. But to think back to that night and how excited he was to meet Joe, and now here we are years later, and I've had Joe on, I think twice since that photo was taken. It's pretty cool.
That's great. Did he ever get to speak to Joe in and around the time that you were talking to him?
It's funny. I tried to get my dad to wait in the green room on StreamYard when I recorded the Namath interview to air on the ESPN New York show I did. And my dad couldn't figure out the technology to do it. So we couldn't even get him on. This is what I mean. That stuff is like, it's a lost cause, but I love the man. He's the absolute greatest. He's done so much for me, and I can't thank him enough.
All of us Jake Asman fans appreciate him and your whole family for helping mold who you are and giving us the Jake Asman we love and enjoy today. Shout out to your dad there. Next up, we have Aurora. I'm not quite sure if I'm saying, is that how you pronounce her name? Aurora?
Aurora, I believe is how you say it.
Is it
Aurora?
Aurora? This is like a controversy, apparently.
Aurora. Or is it Aurora?
I think it's important that we continue to get it wrong.
I genuinely feel bad because she's awesome. I met her in person. Such a sweet person. Obviously a great listener and, a huge Jet fan. And, her and I have the dynamic of we're both Jet fans living in cities in Texas. She's in Dallas. I've been to Houston for the last, almost 6 years. So we have that, but I struggle to properly say her name no matter how many times I try and phonetically sound it out in my head.
She'd like to know, what is your biggest pet peeve? trying to pronounce her name, perhaps?
Yeah, trying to pronounce the name Aurora. Sports bars that don't have the games on. You ever go to a sports bar and you show up and they don't even have the TVs on what is clearly the biggest game that day? That drives me nuts. It happens all the time. The best sports bars are the ones who always have the games on the right TVs, not have some random soccer game or a re-air of a game that ended hours ago. They know, hey, there's a live NBA game, we're having that. There's a football game on, we're having that. If you're a sports bar and you don't have the games on the proper channels, like that drives me insane. So I would go with that.
All right, next up for Aurora, what is your favorite quote?
The quote I jokingly just text my friends just to mess around is, with great power comes great responsibility. You know, Ben Parker from Spider-Man. That's not my favorite quote. That's just a quote I probably just throw in there for no reason, just to mess with people. I like the quote, living the dream, because I truly do feel like at times what I get to do is like living the dream. Like, I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I get to do that every day. I get paid to talk about the teams that I care the most about, you know, the storylines I care the most about. So I'll go with living the dream. It was my high school yearbook quote, and I feel like years later, it's still pretty true. Like, I feel like, you know, everything I've wanted to do, you know, I'm not where I want to be, obviously, just yet, but I'm certainly on that path where I feel like I've been able to do a lot of really cool things in my career, and it certainly has beat ever having a real job.
Can we say the runner-up, though, is if it moves,
hit it. If it don't move,
hit it.
If you're not sure, guess what?
Hit it. Okay, so who is your dream dinner party guest, living or dead?
Derek Jeter. And I want Jeter because there would be no cameras, right? I just want like unfiltered, like life of Derek. If you could give him truth serum and he actually would be honest about like some of the crazy things he has seen and some of those awesome Yankee stories he could share. I mean, Jeter was my guy growing up, right? I was like most people my age, like, Derek Jeter's your favorite athlete, favorite player, all that. I'd love to get dinner with Derek Jeter and just talk about his career and what he's meant to me and hear some great stories from him.
As a Yankee fan, I would have gone with Rivera, but I agree with you. Jeter's going to have the better stories.
Mo would be great too, though. That's not a bad one. Honestly, you want good stories from some of those Yankee teams? Don't you feel like David Wells or David Cohen would be a pick?
They might not remember half of the stories, though.
That might be the problem. Posada would be great too, because he's fiery and he was like the emotional leader of those teams, and I'm sure he'd be a blast to talk with too.
Do you have any special skills? I don't know what that means. Now this one you could go down a dark path, I'm sure. But do you have any special skills that you'd like to let us know about?
I mean, I consider myself the best orderer of Chipotle that exists. I can give you every trick in the book. I don't know if that's a special skill or not, or that makes me a nut job. And look, I'll tell you right now, I will be putting those skills to the test when we wrap up this awesome conversation, because it's that time, baby. It's Chipotle time. Let's go.
Chipotle time.
Looks good. Now close the deal with a handful of that cheese so I can top off my miserable evening with excruciating stomach cramps.
I saved the best for last. Rat Diddy, and he's got two questions, and one of them you more or less hit on, which is about your college and work. But his question has been asked by a couple of people, and apparently the Asmaniacs would like to know if Jake has a relationship, of some sort, or you prefer to keep that super private.
No, right now I do not. I think that's part of the reason why I want to get back to New York. I'm not going to sit here and say I haven't had like a thing or two since I've like lived down in Houston for, nearly 6 years. But I've never really looked for a serious relationship at all, because I never thought, one, I'd be here that long, and two, like I never wanted to be faced with a scenario where it'd be difficult to move because I was in a relationship and I didn't want to go and pursue the next thing. So I'm not. And I think part of the reason why I want to get back to New York is if I happen to meet someone, it's like, great, well, now I don't have to worry about like moving because I'm already in the city I want to live in. What do the kids say, Gator? Single but ready to mingle? We'll go with that.
So, Jake, would you rather have uncontrollable gas during every podcast for the rest of your life, or uncontrollable gas on every first date for the rest of your life?
Uncontrollable gas on every first date, because the podcast, I mean, people are going to hear that. The first date is probably just going to be heard by just the person I'm on the date with. So if I could somehow get by the first date, maybe we're in a loud environment, and I could get to the second date, I never have to worry about it. The podcast I do every day. I mean, it will be a disaster for the rest of my life if I chose the first option.
Okay. Right on. No. Oh, did you hear that bell? You know what time it is. It's Gator adulation time. It's time for you to say something nice about Gator. I just need something so desperately from you to just make me feel good about myself because I'm so self-involved.
That's a nice hat you're wearing.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Good. Good.
Final question. It's actually a series of questions. We close, Jake, with the famous questionnaire by the late, great James Lipton. Dearest Jake, what is your favorite word?
The word I spell the most. J-E-T-S.
What is your least favorite word?
Also the word I spell the most. J-E-T-S.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I would say a great show that we do on YouTube or a great radio show. You know, when you feel like you nailed it, like that's such an awesome feeling, or you feel like you have a great topic that you're going to dive into. I love the creative process of putting together a good YouTube show or a good radio show. I think that always gets you going, that gets you excited, because once again, if you love what you do, it doesn't actually feel like work. And I feel like those are the best moments when something big time kind of comes together.
What turns you off?
Bad breath. Stanky breath.
Pot smokers have the worst breath.
Oh,
don't you think?
Terrible.
And they don't know it. What is your favorite curse word?
I'm a big F word guy, you know? I'll throw the F word around. Are you going to bleep this out, or do I say it? How does it work?
No, bang it out. Give us one. Give us a good one.
All right, here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Fuck.
Yeah, feels good, right?
Oh, yeah. Gets you going.
What sound or noise do you love?
My favorite sound is the classic, football pads colliding into each other noise. Like that just screams like heaven for the diehard football fan that I am. Like pads, the grunting, and then all the pop of the pad coming together. That's the best. Also, speaking of pops, when you're playing catch on the pop of the baseball mitt, when you get it perfectly in the pocket, that coming together, just a beautiful noise. And then the swoosh of a basketball hoop, the best.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Anything that comes out of the mouth of a Patriots fan, so the Bills and Dolphins fans in there as well. I'll tell you what, I hate the screeching noise, man. That does something to my ears. Screeching noise. Like
You're
the
talking about
nails
the
on
chalkboard?
Yeah,
Okay.
the worst.
You need therapy if you like that. What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
I think I would be a pretty good PR director for a sports team or a marketing guy for a player. I would want to do something where I'd work with an athlete or I'd work with a team. And I could see myself, after being around so many different marketing guys and agents, at some of the events I've covered, I think I'd be pretty good at identifying good brands to work with my clients, making sure that if they're doing interviews, they're on the right shows. I'd be very good at helping a brand reach the right athlete or helping an athlete reach the right brand. So I think something in marketing, and then I have a lot of experience on the PR side as well. I think I don't want to do the nitty gritty PR stuff of writing game notes and transcribing press conferences to send out to reporters, but being the head PR person for a team where I could oversee common sense and make sure that team doesn't do things stupid. I think I'd be good at gauging what's good, what's bad from a PR perspective,
And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome aboard, baby. Here we go.
I thank you so very much for your time, good man. May your future be filled with blessings and good fortune, but most importantly, happiness, love, and good health. I thank you, Jake.
Gator, you are one of the all-time greats. It was an honor to sit down with you and do this, and I can't wait to continue to watch what your channel continues to put out and create, because you are one of the just pure geniuses in the content curating space. And it's been so cool to collaborate with you and work with you on my show. And I'm excited to see what you have coming up next, man, because the sky's the limit for what you're doing.
Thank you, man. I'm blessed to know you. That's it from Gator McKLUSKY's Gator Sports Channel. Thanks to Jake Asman for a lot of his time, and hopefully you guys learned a little something outside of his Jets passion. See you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get notified about new videos right here on the Gator McKLUSKY Sports Channel.